Darkness does not begin with a scream. It begins with a question, a whisper, a small, trembling sound that rises from a place where light has long forgotten its own name. In the cold vacuum of the void, where dead suns drift like hollow skulls and ancient war echoes across time itself, something moves slowly, silently, as if waking from an age-old grave. They say that the past is dead. They say that traitors burn in the Emperor's light, their names erased, their memories condemned. But they lie, because some names refuse to die. Some legends cling to existence like a wound that never heals. And this one still bleeds in the endless dark. A figure stands upon a drifting shard of ruined metal, the broken spine of some forgotten battlefield. His armor is blacker than the void around him, as if carved from the absence of hope itself. His shadow stretches impossibly far longer than any mortal life, longer than any dynasty, longer than the Imperium that once tried to forget him. His eyes burn like twin wounds in reality, filled with a hatred so ancient, so patient, it feels less like emotion and more like destiny. There are countless monsters in the galaxy, but only one is whispered by enemies and worshippers alike with the same trembling fear. Only one has carried the fire of hatred across 10,000 years. Only one has refused death, refused mercy, refused forgiveness, Abaddon. But the galaxy does not remember him as he truly was. They remember a destroyer, a warlord, a bringer of apocalypse. They do not remember the man who stood long before the darkness claimed him. They do not remember the loyalty carved into his soul, the pride forged into his bones, the love he carried for a father who would one day die screaming in front of him. They do not remember the tragedy. And that is where the story truly begins, not with a villain, not with a monster, but with a promise that's shattered under the weight of destiny. The void trembles around him. Lights flicker in distant star wrecks as if reacting to his presence. The warp hums like a restless beast, sensing the beating heart of a man who has defied gods and emperors alike. There is a silence here, a dreadful, suffocating silence that presses on the soul like the breath of a corpse. It is the silence before a storm, before a crusade, before a name is spoken again after millennia of fear. Deep inside this darkness, a voice murmurs, not human, not demon, but something older, something in the galaxy's bones. It whispers of betrayal, of fire, of empires broken under an iron will. It whispers of a child crafted for war, raised for loyalty, destined for tragedy. It whispers of the moment when he picked up his father's fallen legacy and walked into the jaws of the gods themselves. And as the voice grows clearer, the darkness seems to lean closer, like an audience gathering around a storyteller who has promised a tale soaked in blood. There is movement in the air, slow and deliberate, as if unseen hands are shifting the fabric of memory itself. Scenes flicker in the void, fleeting images of glory long dead. The Luna wolves marching beneath bright banners, their armor shining like silver among stars that still knew hope. A younger Abaddon walking beside his brothers, proud, fierce, unbroken. Horus standing like a god among men, smiling as he placed a hand on his first captain's shoulder. A future full of light, full of purpose, full of promise. A future that would one day be drowned in fire. All of it fades like smoke. Only the darkness remains. And in that darkness, Abaddon finally speaks, not with a voice, but with a chilling presence that presses into the soul. A presence that says, "This is not a story of heroes." A presence that says, "This is not a tale of redemption." A presence that says, "You came here searching for answers, but what you will receive is a wound that never closes." The void shivers around him as if recoiling from his will. Stars flicker and die in the distance, swallowed by shadows that twist like serpents. It feels as though reality itself is pulling away from him, not from fear, but from reverence. Because in this moment, the galaxy remembers him. Not as a traitor, not as a failure, But as the one truth it cannot escape, the darkness that follows every light, the shadow that stands behind every victory, the end that waits behind every beginning. He raises his weapon slowly, the motion heavy with memory. The talon of Horus crackles with ancient hunger, its lightning claws humming like a predator tasting the air. Somewhere deep within its metal bones, the last echo of a fallen Warmaster still sleeps. And Abaddon carries it not as a slave to the past, but as its executioner. As its final, unbroken legacy. The void breathes. The warp trembles. And the story begins not with hope, not with light, but with the quiet, suffocating truth that some destinies are written in the dark. Some paths cannot be escaped. And some names, once spoken, can never be forgotten. This is the beginning of that name. This is the first shadow of a long, long night. Long before Abaddon's shadow stretched across the galaxy, long before his name became a curse whispered by dying worlds, the Imperium believed itself unbreakable. Billions of humans lived beneath a single banner. Fleets larger than constellations patrolled the void. Armies marched across continents in perfect formation, wearing the Emperor's sigil as if it were a shield against fate. In those days, the galaxy was full of noise-marching boots, roaring engines, the triumphal cry of worlds brought into compliance. Humanity believed it was rising. Humanity believed it was united. Humanity believed it was safe, but belief is a fragile thing. Behind that glittering facade of unity, a deeper truth writhed like a parasite under the skin. A truth older than empires, older than life, older even than the stars themselves. In the center of the Imperium, the warp churned like a wounded god, birthing storms made of hate, hunger, despair, and dreams twisted into nightmares. Demons, impossible and ancient, swam through that madness like fish through water. They watched humanity's rise with amusement and hunger. For every moment of hope the Imperium celebrated, a shadow formed behind it. For every victory, a crack widened. For every life saved, another was sacrificed to the darkness that watches all things. Humanity thought it commanded the stars. But the warp is patient. It does not need armies or fleets. It only waits. And in that waiting, it consumes. The Imperium's golden age, the Great Crusade, was built upon a lie the galaxy refused to acknowledge. Peace could never last. Unity was an illusion. And the brightest lights always cast the longest shadows. Even the Emperor, for all his power, could not see every tendril of chaos weaving through the fabric of his empire. Even he could not control what slept in the hearts of mortals. And even he could not foresee that one day, one of his brightest creations would open the door to the nightmare. The warp did not rage in those days. It observed, silent, patient, watching the primarchs like pieces on a cosmic board. Some shone with righteousness, others with fury, others with brilliance. But only one radiated the kind of pride, devotion, and fire that could move legions with a single command. Only one was loved as a son by the Emperor, and as a god by his legion, Horus. And where Horus walked, another followed loyal, fierce, unbroken. A warrior whose destiny was already being carved in the cold silence between the stars. But destiny does not reveal itself quickly. It unfolds like a wound. And the galaxy, in its ignorance, marched forward without seeing the blood pooling at its feet. Beyond the borders of the Imperium, old civilizations had died screaming under the claws of demons. Fleets vanished without a trace. Entire systems flickered out of existence as if swallowed by an unseen mouth. The Mechanicum recorded anomalous readings they could not explain, massive psychic disturbances, stars behaving like living things, ancient ruins whispering warnings in languages older than mankind. But the Imperium pushed forward, blind to the signs, sure that strength in deep within the warp. Something laughed. The laughter faded into whispers, soft, distant, almost compassionate. They slithered into the dreams of psychers, into the doubts of soldiers, into the ambitions of generals. It was not brute force that chaos used. It was temptation. It was corruption. It was patience. Every fear, every desire, every hidden flaw in the human soul. The warp touched them all like a musician testing strings before a performance. And the greatest performance in the galaxy's history was approaching. Across the Imperium, cults formed like infections. They grew in sewers, in mines, in churches, in noble courts. Some believed they served angels, some believed they served gods. Some believed they served the Emperor himself. All of them were wrong. All of them were being played. And in the eye of terror, the largest warp storm in existence, demons stirred as if waking from an ancient slumber. They sensed that a moment was coming, a fracture in the galaxy's armor, a weakness so deep it would shatter everything the Imperium believed. All it needed was the right man to break first. The warp searched. It watched. It probed the minds of primarchs, commanders, generals, captains. It tested their resolve. It tasted their fears. It measured their anger. And in all its searching, it found one soul shining like a spear of fire, loyal, proud, unyielding. A soul that worshipped glory, honored strength, and feared nothing. A soul that would fight destiny itself. Until destiny bent him. That soul was not Abaddon. It was Horus, but every sun casts a shadow. And that shadow would one day become Abaddon the Despoiler. Before the galaxy burned, before brother killed brother, before the stars drowned in blood, the stage had already been set. The Imperium was a colossus standing on bones. The warp was a storm waiting to break. And between them stood a legion of warriors destined to become the greatest tragedy of mankind. And within that legion stood Abaddon, silent, watchful, unaware that the darkness he would one day command was already staring back at him. Before the galaxy carved his name into its wounds, before he stood as the despoiler of worlds, Abaddon was simply a warrior born into a destiny he did not choose. His beginning was not marked by prophecy or divine signs. There were no omens etched into the stars, no demonic whispers promising greatness. He emerged like every other space marine of the Luna Wolves, forged in the cold sterility of the gene labs, raised in the iron discipline of the Legion, shaped by war long before he could understand what peace meant. Yet even in those early years, something about him burned brighter, cut sharper, weighed heavier than those around him. His brothers fought with strength. Abaddon fought with purpose. Among the Luna Wolves, purpose was everything. They were the Emperor's favored sons, the spearhead of the Great Crusade, the legion that shattered empires and brought countless worlds into compliance. And at their center, the brightest star, the one who gave them identity, pride, and unity, was Horus, the Warmaster, the beloved son, the warrior whose charisma could ignite armies. And it was beneath this titan of glory that Abaddon first found meaning. From the moment Abaddon could hold a blade, he trained as if every swing was a prayer and every victory a step closer to perfection. He did not seek praise. He did not hunger for power. What he sought was worthiness, a worthiness he believed only Horus could measure. His loyalty was not political. It was not strategic. It was not something that could be reasoned away. It was woven into his very spirit. Horus was more than a primarch to him. He was an idea, a flame so brilliant that standing in its light made Abaddon feel whole. Others noticed this intensity long before Abaddon understood it himself. The sergeants who trained him felt a pressure around him, as if failure in his presence carried weight. His brothers described fighting beside him as standing near a volcano calm on the outside, but one heartbeat away from erupting into unstoppable fury. Even the remembrancers, those delicate chroniclers of war, wrote about him with a strange mixture of admiration and unease. They saw in him a purity of purpose that felt unnatural, too sharp, too focused, as if destiny itself had carved him with deliberate hands. His rise through the ranks was not a rise at all. It was a march inevitable, relentless, and unquestioned. The Luna Wolves did not make him first captain merely because he was strong or brave or skilled. They made him first captain because he embodied the Legion's spirit. Because when he walked into a room, warriors straightened. Because when he spoke, they listened. Because in his eyes, they saw the reflection of Horus himself, a reflection sharpened into something more dangerous. But beneath the armor, beneath the discipline and the loyalty, there was a boy who had never been allowed to be anything but a weapon. A boy who had been taught that pride was strength, emotion was weakness, doubt was treason. A boy who looked up at a father shaped like a god and whispered within his heart, "Let me be enough." And though he would never admit it, though he buried the feeling deep within the iron walls of his soul, a part of him feared he never would be. Horus saw the loyalty, the hunger for approval, the unspoken yearning for belonging. And he embraced Abaddon as few Primarchs embraced any of their sons. He taught him strategy, philosophy, the parsing of war, not just as violence, but as art. He called him by name, not rank. He trusted him. And in the quiet moments between campaigns, when the stars drifted slowly beyond the fleet windows, Horus spoke to him not as a superior, but as a father. Abaddon never forgot those moments. They were the few memories in his long life that carried warmth instead of fire. It was this bond that defined him. This bond that shaped him. This bond that would one day destroy him, for in the shadows of the Great Crusade, rumblings began, whispers of politics, jealousies among the Primarchs, doubts in the Emperor's great plan. Horus, burdened by expectations no man could bear, began to fracture beneath the pressure. And Abaddon, ever loyal, ever vigilant, sensed that fracture long before anyone else did. He felt the shift, the tremor, like a distant quake beneath his feet. He saw the weariness in Horus's eyes. He saw the weight of destiny crushing the man he worshipped, and he swore silently, fiercely, that he would never let Horus fall. He would be the sword. He would be the shield. He would be the flame that burned away every threat, every doubt, every enemy. He did not yet know that this vow would one day be the chain that dragged him into the abyss, but the galaxy knew. The warp knew. Destiny knew. For even in these early days, even in his brightest moments, something unseen stirred behind him like a shadow just out of sight, waiting for the moment when devotion would become damnation. And Abaddon, marching proudly at Horus's side, believing himself unbreakable, never looked back to see it. The Luna Wolves did not simply march, they descended upon worlds like a declaration of fate. Their white armor flashed like lightning across battlefields, and their war cries thundered louder than orbital bombardments. They were the Emperor's executioners, the point of his spear, and wherever they went, entire civilizations either knelt or shattered. And at the center of that unstoppable tide walked Abaddon, first captain, the one whose presence could turn fear into fury and confusion into perfect discipline. If Horus was the sun, Abaddon was the storm it cast across the galaxy. There was a rhythm to the Great Crusade in those days. A violent order, fleets emerging from the void, negotiations failing, compliance demanded, and war erupting with the cold inevitability of a heartbeat. The Luna Wolves thrived in that rhythm. They were made for motion, for conquest, for the brutal simplicity of battle. And no one embodied that drive more perfectly than Abaddon. When he led a charge, the Legion did not see a commander, they saw inevitability. When he raised his blade, they felt victory before the first strike ever fell. And when he spoke, his voice carried the certainty of a warrior who believed utterly, completely, unshakably in his purpose. World after world fell before him. Kingdoms that had stood for millennia crumbled in days. Rebellions that once seemed unbreakable vanished like smoke beneath an avalanche. Abaddon moved across the stars, not as a soldier, but as a force of nature, carving the Emperor's will into the bones of the galaxy with cold precision. He was fierce, but never reckless. Proud, but never arrogant. Loyal, but never blind. His brothers followed him with the devotion soldiers usually reserved for gods. And perhaps, in their eyes, he was not so far from one. But what made him truly different was not his strength. It was his clarity. Abaddon saw war not as chaos, but as design. Every battlefield was a puzzle, every enemy a variable, every strike a line in an elegant equation that always ended in dominance. Even the Primarchs took note of his brilliance. Perturabo respected his strategic mind. Angron respected his savagery. Guilliman respected his discipline. And Horus trusted him more than any other son. In Abaddon, he saw not just a captain, but a mirror of what mankind could become: powerful, disciplined, relentless. The bond between them grew with every victory. In war councils, Abaddon often stood at Horus's right hand, offering counsel without fear. Where others hesitated to voice doubts, Abaddon spoke with the certainty of a man who believed his words were not merely opinion but truth. Horus listened. He always listened. And the Legion saw the trust, the closeness, the unspoken understanding, and their faith in Abaddon deepened. Yet beneath all the triumphs, beneath the cheers and the victories, a subtle shift was forming like the distant tremor of an approaching quake. There were battles that should never have been fought. Worlds that resisted more fiercely than expected. Strange Xenos relics unearthed that whispered madness into the minds of Imperial scholars. Psychers reporting visions of storms, of serpents, of darkness. And though the Legion moved forward with the roaring confidence of demigods, Abaddon sometimes felt a faint pressure in the back of his mind, like being watched by something he could not name. He ignored it. He had to, because the Luna Wolves were rising faster, brighter, more gloriously than any other legion. Their banners spread across the galaxy like wildfire. They were the embodiment of the Emperor's dream. And Abaddon, standing at the height of their glory, felt a pride so fierce it bordered on dangerous. He believed the Imperium was unstoppable. He believed the Luna Wolves were eternal. He believed Horus could not fall, and that belief became the foundation of his destiny. And the seed of his ruin, for even as the Legion rose, shadows were gathering at the edges of their triumph. In the warp, whispers coiled like smoke. Demons stirred, their attention sharpening like blades. They watched the Luna Wolves, watched their pride, watched their devotion. They watched Abaddon the warrior whose soul burned, so brightly with purpose that it cast a shadow long enough for the gods to see. Victory made them strong. Pride made them blind. And destiny made them vulnerable. There were nights, rare and fleeting, when Abaddon stood alone on the viewing decks of the flagship, staring into the endless dark as if searching for something he could not name. He would remember the worlds he burned, the lives extinguished under his blade, the enemies who fell begging for mercy he never granted. And a question would stir in his mind, quiet but sharp. Is this what glory looks like? Is this the future I fight for? But as quickly as the doubt came, he crushed it. Because doubt was treason. Hesitation was weakness. And weakness had no place beside Horus. So he stood tall. He pushed forward. He led the Luna Wolves into deeper stars, into greater wars, into a future he believed with all his heart would be glorious. He did not know that glory was a lie. He did not know that the Legion's rise was only the first act of a tragedy. He did not know that every victory was pushing him closer to the moment when the galaxy would split open, revealing the nightmare beneath its skin. And the one who would feel that tear first would be Abaddon. The galaxy had never felt more alive or more fragile. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if sensing a change beyond comprehension. A moment when fate would no longer be guided by the Emperor's hand. The Great Crusade, that grand campaign of unity and conquest, continued with relentless precision, But beneath its brilliance, something insidious stirred. Whispers drifted through the warp, soft and serpentine, carrying promises that burned like acid in the minds of men. Rumors of rebellion, of betrayal, of shadows growing in the hearts of even the most loyal primarchs. And in the midst of it all, Horus, the favored son, began to feel the subtle weight of doubt and discontent pressing against his soul. Abaddon sensed it first, not in whispers, not in signs, but in the small, almost imperceptible cracks in his master's demeanor. Horus was restless. He was questioning orders, lingering on decisions that once would have been executed without hesitation. He smiled less, laughed less. His presence, once a sun around which the Luna wolves orbited, now cast a longer shadow, one that reached into the hearts of every son, every warrior, every captain. Abaddon watched, always vigilant, never speaking, trusting the instincts honed through decades of campaigns. Something was coming, something dark and terrible. The first true tremor of betrayal erupted on Davin. The mission was supposed to be simple: pacify a world harboring heretical cults, maintain order, return to the Crusade fleet. But the planet was a trap. Demons, cunningly hidden and whispered into reality by the warp, attacked with precision that could not have been natural. The soldiers panicked, the psychers screamed, and the Luna wolves were forced into an engagement unlike any before. Abaddon led his brothers with unerring skill, carving a path through chaos as he had done countless times before. But even as he fought, even as his blade sang death through the enemy lines, he felt the first cold prick of fear that this was not ordinary war. Horus returned from Davin changed. His charm had shifted, his confidence replaced by uncertainty masked in command. He began speaking in ways that unsettled even the most loyal questions of morality, of power, of the Emperor's ultimate vision. And when the whispers from the warp found him, when the demonic seeds took root, Abaddon did not hesitate. He followed Horus, not out of blind faith, not out of ambition, but out of loyalty so deep that he could not imagine another path. When Horus embraced the dark truths of the warp, Abaddon's world shifted. What had been simple loyalty, honor, victory became complex, dangerous, and horrifying. The galaxy itself seemed to lean into the change, responding to the alteration of the Warmaster's will. Ships disappeared in the void, systems revolted without warning, and strange, alien phenomena appeared in space like cracks in reality. And as the first seeds of the heresy spread, Abaddon remained steadfast at Horus's side. The unshakable pillar in a storm of madness. They marched upon Isvan III, where the first test of allegiance would decide the fate of the Crusade. Loyalist and traitor primarchs faced one another across the fields of fire, the air thick with the stench of betrayal. Abaddon's resolve never wavered. He struck down brothers, those who had once fought at his side, without hesitation, without remorse. Each death carved a scar into his soul, but he bore it silently, understanding that loyalty demanded sacrifice beyond morality. Every drop of blood spilled in the name of Horus, every shattered skull and torn body, was another step closer to destiny. The days stretched into nights of fire and screams. Planets burned. Fleets shattered against one another. Demons found flesh to taste. The screams of the innocent and guilty alike became the music of the heresy, and Abaddon played his part with precision. He had not yet become the Despoiler, but the foundations were being laid, the careful cultivation of fear, the gathering of power, the shaping of a man into legend. Every act of war, every command, every kill, homed him into something the galaxy would one day both fear and worship. And yet, beneath the armor, beneath the discipline, beneath the perfection of his martial skill, Abaddon carried a private horror. He mourned quietly the death of his world as he knew it, the world where honor still mattered, where brothers stood side by side, where the line between hero and villain had not yet been erased. Each time he struck down a loyalist brother, each time a planet fell beneath Horus's command, He felt the silent cry of something sacred dying. And he swallowed it, for there was no space for weakness, no room for doubt. The galaxy demanded action, and he would be the blade that carved its path. By the end of Istvan, the die had been cast. Horus was no longer the son of the Emperor. He had become something else, something terrible, guided by forces that reached beyond the stars. And Abaddon, having stood beside him through fire, through betrayal, through unimaginable horror, understood the truth of his own path. There was no turning back. Loyalty had become damnation. Devotion had become obsession. And the galaxy would burn. From that day forward, Abaddon walked in the shadow of a fallen Warmaster, carrying the weight of billions, the echoes of countless deaths, and a promise that would outlast stars themselves. He did not yet call himself the Despoiler. He did not yet wield the weapons that would make him legend. But in the depths of his soul, in the quiet moments when no one could see him, he whispered to the darkness, "I will carry this. I will finish what has begun. And nothing in this galaxy, no man, no god, no demon, will stop me." The heresy consumed the galaxy like wildfire, burning everything in its path, worlds, fleets, and the hearts of men. Abaddon moved through the chaos with an efficiency that terrified both friend and foe. Each battle was a lesson in devastation, each victory a reminder of the price of loyalty. He did not fight for glory, not yet. He fought for Horus, for the cause that now bent reality itself, and for a promise forged in blood and fire, that the galaxy would remember their names. Even if only as nightmares whispered in fear, the Dropsite massacre on Istvan V was his first true test in war, against brothers who once fought beside him. Loyalist legions, unprepared for the betrayal of their comrades, were struck down with merciless precision. Abaddon led the strike squads, carving paths through the ranks with the discipline of a predator, yet with a measured control that left even seasoned warriors unsettled. Every swing of his blade was deliberate. Every order he gave weighed with consequence. Lives were extinguished, systems fell into chaos, and the screams of the dying painted the skies red. But in Abaddon's mind, the horror was not victory, it was necessity. The Luna Wolves, now fractured into warbands loyal to Horus, relied on him as both shield and spear. He orchestrated the assaults with cold calculation, anticipating resistance before it could form. His presence on the battlefield was not merely tactical. It was psychological. Warriors, even those on the cusp of rebellion, faltered at the sight of him. Abaddon's name had not yet become legend, but his reputation was already a weapon. Fear followed him as faithfully as his shadow. And by the end of the massacre, whispers of his efficiency, ruthlessness, and eerie calm spread across the traitor legions like a contagion. Abaddon's campaigns were not limited to singular acts of war. Siege after siege, world after world fell to his command. The burning of Prospero, where the 1,000 suns suffered for their heretical practices, saw Abaddon coordinating orbital strikes and ground incursions with precision that rivaled the Primarchs themselves. He did not hesitate. Hesitation had no place in his mind. Every civilian, every loyalist soldier, every sorcerer who resisted, became part of the lesson. Loyalty demanded obedience, and disobedience demanded destruction. Yet, even in the midst of his cold efficiency, a whisper of sorrow lingered beneath the surface. A quiet acknowledgement of the lives lost to his blade. But the galaxy was not kind, even to the most disciplined of warriors. Abaddon faced betrayals and ambushes that tested the limits of his skill. Loyalist fleets ambushed columns of traitor ships. Xeno's mercenaries disrupted supply lines. The warp itself conspired, sending storms and demonic incursions to challenge every advance. And through all of this, Abaddon adapted. Every loss, every setback, every scar on his armor became a lesson etched into his mind. He learned to anticipate chaos not as disorder, but as another variable to manipulate, another battlefield to master. Among the most haunting moments of this era was the siege of Terra's peripheral systems, where the traitor legions tested the defenses of worlds loyal to the Emperor. Abaddon's forces struck with terrifying efficiency, razing cities, collapsing orbital fortresses, and severing command structures. Yet he observed the suffering, not with pity, but with recognition of its inevitability. This was war, and he had long since accepted that war demanded the death of both the innocent and the guilty alike. Each act was a step toward shaping the galaxy into a mirror of his new reality, a universe where only the strong survive and only the cunning endured. Through it all, Abaddon's legend began to crystallize. Even among the traitors, he was recognized not simply as a warrior, but as a force of nature. He was the first to strike, the last to retreat. His strategies became studied examples for other captains, and his name carried the weight of inevitability. To fight Abaddon was to fight fate itself, and those who faced him understood that the battle might end. But the shadow of his actions would never fade. Yet beneath every victory, beneath every conquered world and shattered fleet, Abaddon felt the persistent echo of what he had lost, a galaxy he once believed could be united under honor. A brotherhood now fractured, a future he could never reclaim. The human cost, the devastation of those who had once been his comrades, haunted him in fleeting moments of solitude. But he buried these thoughts, as a soldier must, and moved forward. For in the chaos of betrayal, in the firestorm of war, there was only one constant, Horus, and the path they had chosen together, by the time the heresy had reached its crescendo. Abaddon was no longer simply a warrior of the Luna Wolves. He had become their embodiment, their instrument, their shadow in the darkness. The galaxy remembered the name of the Warmaster, but among those who survived the terror of Abaddon's campaigns, they remembered his deeds, whispered in fear and awe. Every world burned, every fleet shattered, every legion weakened or destroyed. The echo of his efficiency reverberated across the stars. And in that echo, a truth settled. Abaddon was not merely participating in the heresy. He was shaping it, molding it, and preparing the galaxy for the darkness that would one day bear his name. The siege of Terra had begun, and the galaxy trembled beneath the weight of the greatest betrayal in human history. The Emperor's palace, a bastion of light and divine authority, stood like a lone star resisting the encroaching darkness. Yet even its brilliance was not enough to blind the galaxy to the shadow that had taken root. Abaddon stood among the traitor legions, watching as the final act of the Warmaster's rebellion unfolded, aware that every movement, every strategy, every strike was a prelude to something beyond imagination. The tides of war had reached their zenith, and yet the one he had followed, the one he had vowed to protect, now walked a path toward death that he could not prevent. Horus had been the son of the Emperor, the golden hope of mankind. He had been mentor, brother, and godlike figure to Abaddon, whose loyalty had never wavered, even as the galaxy descended into chaos. And now, faced with the inevitable confrontation with the Emperor himself, Horus faltered. Not in will, not in power, but in something that no soldier, no strategist, no primarch could withstand, the burden of absolute destiny. The air itself seemed to bend with anticipation, the warp thrumming in violent resonance, feeding on the fear and hope that collided in equal measure. Abaddon watched, heart and soul entwined with the fate of the Warmaster, knowing that what was about to happen could not be altered. No matter how fiercely he wished it otherwise, the battle was cataclysmic, a collision of divine power and mortal ambition. The Emperor, radiant and terrible, unleashed the full weight of his will against Horus, whose body had become a vessel of corruption and brilliance, power and madness intertwined. Abaddon's eyes, burning with both devotion and despair, witnessed the end of what he had believed eternal. He saw the Warmaster struck down, torn not merely by weapons, but by the realization of everything he had lost and corrupted. The screams of the dying echoed through the halls of the Imperial Palace, But none were as deafening as the silence that followed Horus's final fall. Abaddon approached, not as a savior, but as a witness. The man who had taught him, trusted him, inspired him, now lay broken. His body, a vessel of ambition and godlike power, was nothing more than mortal flesh surrendered to inevitability. And yet, in that stillness, there was a spark, a final act of defiance. Horus's eyes, even in death, met Abaddon's, and in that gaze he conveyed both command and absolution. Carry the burden. Finish what we began. Bear the darkness that cannot be contained. It was the last lesson. It was the final gift. And it was the moment that would define Abaddon forever. No words were spoken. None were needed. Loyalty, forged over decades of war, of shared victories and shared blood, demanded that he understand. The galaxy around him could not see it, could not comprehend it, but Abaddon understood fully. Horus had died not as a victim, but as a catalyst. And from his death, a new figure would rise, one who would carry forward the mission with a vision sharpened by loss, sharpened by fury, sharpened by the inescapable reality of betrayal and necessity. Abaddon lifted Horus's body with trembling strength, cradling the fallen Warmaster as one might cradle a brother, a father, or a god. Every moment felt eternal, every heartbeat a thunderclap in the silence of devastation. He felt the weight of countless promises, of lives extinguished, of an empire fractured beyond repair. And as he carried Horus to the safety of their fleet, away from the Emperor's wrath, he whispered the vow that would echo across 10,000 years. I will not fail. I will carry your legacy. I will be the instrument of destiny. In the following days, as the galaxy reeled from the climax of the heresy, Abaddon transformed that grief into obsession. The loss of Horus did not weaken him. It hardened him, tempered him into something no man, no legion, no god could challenge. He would not merely lead the Black Crusades, he would define them. He would wield power, strategy, and fear with precision, ensuring that the Warmaster's vision would never die, even if he alone remained to enact it. And so, the boy who had once stood loyal at Horus's side became something more than a captain, more than a warrior. He became the heir to the Warmaster's ambition, the bearer of vengeance, the shadow in which the Imperium would tremble for millennia. The heresy had claimed the galaxy, but Horus's death claimed Abaddon's soul, forging it in fire and despair, shaping it into a weapon capable of bending the stars themselves to his will. In the quiet moments, when the bloodied banners hung limp over the smoldering fleets and the cries of the dying faded into echoes, Abaddon would kneel and touch the fallen Warmaster's armor. And in those moments he would swear again, not to a god, not to the Emperor, not to mankind, but to a promise that had begun long before the first shot had been fired, and would endure long after the last star burned out. I am the hand that will complete what you began. I am the shadow that will follow your name until the galaxy knows fear itself. Horus had fallen. The galaxy had not yet realized it. And Abaddon was ready to rise. The galaxy had fractured, its spine broken by betrayal and war, and in that fractured expanse, Abaddon stood unbroken. Yet even the strongest of warriors is not immune to the seductive whispers of the void. And in the silence after Horus's death, the shadows of the warp reached for him. At first, it was subtle, a chill brushing the edge of his consciousness. Fleeting visions of power unimaginable, whispers that promised the fulfillment of all his desires and vengeance against a galaxy that had witnessed the fall of its gods. Abaddon resisted, as any loyal son of the Warmaster would, but the longer he lingered in the aftermath, the louder the call became. The warp knew his purpose, and it did not seek to destroy him, it sought to shape him. He had walked in loyalty all his life, and now loyalty itself felt hollow. The Emperor lived, untouched and radiant, yet the universe had punished the sons who had followed him. Countless worlds lay in ruins, billions of lives extinguished, And Horus, the man he had pledged his soul to, was gone. Abaddon understood, with a clarity that was almost painful, that the galaxy would never reward devotion. The universe was cruel, blind, and indifferent. And in that realization, the warp found its way into his mind, offering him a truth he could not ignore. Power was not granted. Power was taken. And vengeance, when wielded without compromise, could shape eternity. The path to the Eye of Terror was not just a journey through space, but a journey through the soul. Abaddon entered its storms as a soldier, and emerged as something else, a man remade in the image of darkness. The demons and whispers of the warp did not break him, they honed him. Every step through the maddening energies, every confrontation with creatures older than stars, was a trial that stripped away hesitation, fear, and pity. By the time he emerged, Abaddon understood a truth that few mortals could comprehend. Loyalty without power is a lie. And mercy is a weakness that the universe will always exploit. It was there, in the eye of that storm, that he truly fell not into madness, but into purpose. Chaos was not merely a force of destruction. It was a tool, a weapon, a canvas on which he could paint the vengeance and destiny he had long envisioned. And he embraced it fully. Abaddon did not become a servant of the dark whims of the demons. He became their master. He bent their power to his will, commanding legions with the precision and discipline that had always defined him. The galaxy had been fractured, and he would shape the pieces into something new, something stronger, something eternal, something feared. The first black rituals were not mere ceremonies, they were declarations. Every incantation, every pact, every summoning was both a honing of power and a testament to his devotion to the path Horus had begun. The Black Legion was born in fire and blood, a legion not defined by names or primarchs, but by the singular purpose of Abaddon's vision. And in its ranks, those who had survived the heresy saw not a broken soldier, but a leader remade, terrifying in his composure, unyielding in his ambition, and absolute in his command. Yet the transformation was not without cost. The man who had once known loyalty, love, and camaraderie now carried a solitude so profound it was almost tangible. Every decision, every command, every conquest was filtered through the lens of a man who had seen the ultimate cost of devotion. And in the quiet moments, when the screams of battle faded into the void, Abaddon confronted the truth that defined him. He could never return to what he had been. And he would never forgive a galaxy that had destroyed his brother. His future, and the ideals he had once believed unshakable, from the warp. The demons whispered encouragement and caution alike. They showed him the possibilities of his ambition, the inevitable power he could wield, and the countless stars that would burn under his guidance. And Abaddon, whose mind had always measured the impossible and rendered it conquerable, began to see not threats, but instruments, not destruction, but opportunity. The universe would bow or burn, and in that clarity, he found a terrible peace. By the time he emerged from the storms, Abaddon was no longer the first captain of the Luna Wolves. He was no longer the loyal son of Horus. He was something beyond, something unbound, something eternal in its darkness. He had fallen into chaos not as a victim, but as a sovereign of ruin, a commander whose vision now stretched across the stars. The galaxy would tremble at his name, not because of the Warmaster's shadow, but because of the shadow he himself had become. And in that shadow, a single truth remained, cold and absolute. The universe would learn fear. Not tomorrow, not in centuries, but in every moment that Abaddon walked among the stars. The Despoiler had arisen, and nothing, mortal or divine, would stand in his way. The ashes of the Luna Wolves had cooled, but the fires in Abaddon's heart burned hotter than ever. The Legion, once proud and shining under the banner of the Emperor, was shattered, scattered by betrayal, slaughter, and the final collapse of Horus. Those who survived the heresy were haunted by the carnage they had wrought, the lives they had taken, and the death of the Warmaster who had been both their god and their father. Yet in that despair, Abaddon saw an opportunity, a chance to create something new, something unbound by the mistakes of the past, something that could wield the legacy of Horus and the fury of the galaxy itself. He took the remnants of the Luna Wolves, broken, disillusioned, and burned by war, and reshaped them. Every soldier who joined him did so by choice or by fear, or by the understanding that loyalty to the Black Legion demanded both obedience and strength. Abaddon did not name them after a primarch, after a past that no longer existed. The Black Legion was born not from nostalgia, but from purpose, its identity forged in blood, fire, and the indomitable will of its new master. It was a legion unlike any other, disciplined, relentless, unyielding, and driven by a singular goal to conquer, to punish, to avenge, and to endure. The black armor of the legion reflected more than darkness. It reflected intent. Every sigil, every emblem, every mark upon their breastplates told a story of survival and vengeance. They were the heirs of Horus, not by blood or loyalty to a dead cause, but by the living embodiment of his ambition, carried forward through Abaddon's vision. And in every campaign, in every raid, in every confrontation with the Imperium, they moved as a single entity of force that combined the precision of the past with the ruthless freedom of the future. Abaddon's own transformation was complete. He no longer needed to follow the shadow of another. Where once he had walked behind Horus, learning, observing, and protecting, he now led. His mind, sharpened by decades of war and tempered by grief, commanded both strategy and terror. Every move was calculated to instill fear before the first blade struck. Every campaign was designed to demonstrate that resistance was futile and survival optional. The Black Legion, under his guidance, became not merely a military force, but an instrument of cosmic inevitability. The first Crusades of the Black Legion were swift and brutal. Worlds that had once resisted the Imperium's authority found themselves engulfed by coordinated strikes that left no room for rebellion. Fortress worlds fell to cunning strategies that combined the brilliance of a strategist with the fury of a warrior who had seen countless battles. And in every confrontation, Abaddon's presence was the fulcrum of fear, a living reminder that the galaxy's shadows had a mind, a will, and a purpose. Yet his campaigns were not without symbolism. The Black Legion, unlike its predecessors, carried the memory of betrayal and the legacy of vengeance. Every conquest, every victory, was a declaration that the Imperium's hubris had consequences. Abaddon did not seek to destroy merely for power, but to impose a lesson, a constant reminder of the price of complacency and weakness. The galaxy's rulers, generals, and leaders began to whisper his name with dread, understanding that facing him meant not just defeat, but a reckoning with every failure of the past. Within the ranks of the Black Legion, Abaddon inspired both reverence and fear. He demanded absolute loyalty, but he rewarded skill and courage. Those who excelled rose swiftly. Those who faltered were eliminated without mercy. The balance of fear and respect created a legion that was unmatched in cohesion, ruthlessness, and adaptability. Under his command, the Black Legion became an extension of his will, precise, unstoppable, and terrifyingly efficient. But it was not only the Imperium that feared him. Across the galaxy, rumors of the Black Legion spread into the warp itself. Demons watched and whispered, drawn to the singularity of Abaddon's ambition. Some sought to tempt him further, others sought to challenge him, but all quickly learned that he was no mere mortal to be swayed. He had walked through the storms of the warp, faced horrors that would shatter lesser souls, and emerged unbroken. The Black Legion was not just an army, it was the manifestation of Abaddon's mastery over both chaos and strategy. And in the quiet moments, after worlds had burned and fleets had shattered, Abaddon allowed himself a small reflection. He thought of Horus, of loyalty, of the path that had led him here. He allowed himself a whisper of grief, tempered instantly by resolve. For he knew, as he always had, that the galaxy would not wait. The Imperium would rebuild, and when it did, he would be ready. The Black Legion would rise again and again. Each crusade, a dagger in the heart of the Emperor's dream. Each victory, a step closer to proving that the shadows cast by the Warmaster were eternal, and that Abaddon, now more than ever, was their harbinger. The galaxy had survived the heresy, but it had not healed. The Imperium, fractured and bleeding from the scars of betrayal, believed it could rebuild, believing that the shadow of Horus had ended with his death. But the universe had already shifted. Abaddon, the heir to the Warmaster's ambition, had consolidated his forces, honed his strategies, and prepared for a war that would not be confined by loyalty, morality, or even the Emperor's will. The First Black Crusade was not merely a strike against the Imperium. It was a statement, a warning, and a prelude to a darkness that would stretch across 1,000 systems. Abaddon's fleet moved like a storm, precise and unrelenting. Every ship, every warrior, every weapon had been tested in the fires of the heresy and the crucible of the warp. There was no hesitation, no weakness. Every world that fell before the Black Legion became both trophy and lesson. The crusade was meticulously planned, every attack designed to maximize fear, confusion, and destruction. And everywhere the Legion appeared, the galaxy began to understand that the name Abaddon was no longer just a whisper. It was a prophecy. The first targets were border worlds, isolated systems that served as the Imperium's outposts. They were strong, but not invincible. Abaddon led from the front, commanding assaults that combined strategic genius with brutal efficiency. Planetary defenses were shattered before the defenders understood the nature of the threat. Armies were routed, fortresses razed, and cities burned in a display of power that left even the most steadfast loyalists shaken. The Black Legion did not merely conquer, they dominated, bending every element of war to their will. Yet Abaddon's ambition extended beyond mere conquest. Every action of the Black Crusade was a lesson, a message to the Imperium. The galaxy had changed, and the old order would no longer dictate its course. Resistance was punished with calculated cruelty, while compliance was exploited to build fear among allies. Abaddon understood the power of psychology as much as the power of weapons. The Imperium's loyalty was fragile, and he would exploit every crack, every doubt, every fear, until obedience was a choice dictated by terror. In the midst of these campaigns, Abaddon himself became a symbol, a figure of legend and nightmare. Warriors whispered of his presence on the battlefield, a storm of black armor cutting down enemies with the precision of a blade, guided by both genius and vengeance. Demons followed his commands, not as masters, but as instruments, adding their unnatural strength to the already devastating force of the Legion. By the time the First Crusade reached its climax, entire sectors were in panic, with fleets abandoning positions and governors surrendering without resistance. The galaxy began to understand that this was not a temporary threat. This was a new era of war. Yet even in the triumphs, Abaddon's mind remained sharp, focused on the larger purpose. The First Black Crusade was the beginning, not the end. Each victory, each conquered world, was a step toward a greater objective: to weaken the Imperium to the point that it could never fully recover. To sow chaos so deep that the Emperor's hold on humanity would tremble, and to ensure that the legacy of Horus, the shadow of the Warmaster, would endure through his own hand. He measured each move with meticulous care, knowing that impatience or miscalculation could unravel everything. But for every obstacle, he found a solution fierce, ingenious, and unrelenting. The crusade also cemented his reputation among the remnants of loyalist and traitor alike. No one could doubt that Abaddon was no longer merely a general. He was a force of destiny. To oppose him was to challenge inevitability itself. And while the galaxy reeled from his first wave, he already looked beyond, planning the next campaigns, the next strikes, the next acts that would push the Imperium further into chaos. Every victory was both reward and preparation. A way to sharpen the Black Legion into an instrument capable of striking across the stars for centuries to come. By the time the First Black Crusade ended, the universe had learned a terrifying truth. Abaddon was not just the successor to Horus, he was the harbinger of an age of war that would never end. And in the quiet moments between battles, when the cries of the conquered faded into silence, he allowed himself a single, cold satisfaction. The galaxy feared him, not yet fully, but soon. And that fear would become his most enduring weapon, carried forward in countless Black Crusades, across countless stars, until the name Abaddon echoed through eternity as both shadow and reckoning. Abaddon was no longer simply a warlord. He was something more, a legend forged in the fire of betrayal, honed in the crucible of countless battles, and tempered by the darkness of the warp itself. Across the galaxy, whispers began to grow into fearful shouts. The Black Crusades were not acts of mere vengeance. They were a statement of power, a declaration that the universe itself would bend to the will of the Despoiler. And in that title, he embraced both his purpose and his destiny. The name Despoiler was not given lightly. It was earned through decades of conquest, bloodshed, and relentless strategy. Worlds had fallen before him, loyalist forces had been shattered, and even the Imperium's finest fleets had learned that to meet Abaddon in open combat was to face the inevitability of destruction. But beyond fear, there was method, there was clarity, there was purpose. Every strike, every campaign, every crusade was not random. It was calculated to demonstrate the consequences of defiance, the cost of weakness, and the futility of resisting his vision. Abaddon understood that terror alone was not enough. Power must be wielded with intelligence, precision, and an unshakable presence. He refined the Black Legion into a force unmatched in both loyalty and lethality. Each warrior knew their place, each strike was coordinated, and each conquest served a larger plan. Abaddon himself led from the forefront, inspiring awe and dread simultaneously. The sight of his black-armored figure, flanked by the survivors of the heresy and demonic allies, became synonymous with inevitable doom. Rumors spread across the Imperium like wildfire. No planet was safe, no fleet could outrun him, no system could resist. The galaxy trembled at the name Abaddon the Despoiler. His vision extended far beyond mere revenge. The Imperium had betrayed him, the galaxy had forsaken him, and the memory of Horus's death burned like a brand upon his soul. Each Black Crusade was both punishment and preparation, a methodical erosion of the Emperor's dominion. He understood war not as random chaos but as art, a combination of timing, strategy, and psychological terror. Entire sectors fell before him, not merely because of force, but because he had cultivated fear so deeply that resistance became unthinkable. His genius lay in the union of brutality and intelligence, a mind that could anticipate moves across systems, a hand that could strike without hesitation, a soul that had embraced darkness fully. Yet the Despoiler's rise was not merely the story of military might. It was the story of legend, myth, and fear intertwining to create a figure that surpassed mortality. Tales of his deeds slaughter on Isfahan V, the cunning strikes of the First Black Crusade, fleets destroyed before eyes could comprehend them spread across star systems. He was no longer just a general. He was a nightmare made flesh, a shadow stretching across space, a name that inspired loyalty in his followers and dread in his enemies. The galaxy began to shape itself around his presence, not because it had no defenders, but because no defense could anticipate his vision fully. In the warp, Abaddon's power grew even further. He commanded demons as extensions of his will, bending the unpredictable energies to his designs. Yet he never succumbed to their whims. They served him as instruments, not masters. His understanding of the warp, honed over decades of heresy and countless Black Crusades, allowed him to manipulate chaos itself. It became an ally, a weapon, a force magnifying his already terrifying abilities. In battle, it was as if the universe itself conspired with him. and through all of this, he never forgot Horus. The Despoiler carried the memory of the Warmaster in every decision, every battle, every act of war. He had promised to continue what Horus had begun, to carry the shadow forward, and he had done so with unwavering resolve. Every act of the Black Legion, every conquered world, every terror inflicted upon the Imperium was a testament to that promise. Abaddon had transformed from the loyal son of the Warmaster into the ultimate executor of Horus's vision. By the time he had fully embraced the mantle of the Despoiler, Abaddon had become more than mortal. He was the embodiment of vengeance and strategy, the harbinger of chaos and order fused into a singular purpose. The galaxy had learned fear, and it would learn it again and again. In every system, in every campaign, under the shadow of the Black Legion, led by a figure whose name would echo through eternity, Abaddon the Despoiler. The galaxy had not forgotten the heresy, but it had underestimated the hand that now guided its destiny. Abaddon the Despoiler had transformed from the loyal first captain of the Luna Wolves into a force that eclipsed even the shadow of Horus, his Black Legion. Disciplined, unyielding, and cunning, carved through imperial space with relentless efficiency. The First Black Crusade had been only a beginning. The wars that followed were calculated to remind the Imperium that its survival was never guaranteed. That fear was as potent a weapon as the sharpest blade. The campaigns that followed were both spectacular and horrifying. Worlds that had once believed themselves secure fell to his fleet before they could raise their defenses. Entire sectors were destabilized by the calculated strikes of the Black Legion, and the Imperium's attempts at retaliation only played into his strategies. Abaddon understood the psychological weight of war. It was not enough to defeat armies. He needed to shatter spirits, destroy hope, and ensure that the mere whisper of his name would induce terror long before the first shot was fired. Each Black Crusade became more than a military operation. It was an event, a spectacle of power, and a statement of inevitability. Abaddon moved through the galaxy with precision, employing feints, ambushes, and terror tactics that left entire worlds broken in weeks. Yet his genius was not in mere destruction, it was in foresight. He anticipated reinforcements, supply lines, and political responses, weaving them into strategies that ensured every act of war would cascade into greater results. Abaddon's mind, shaped by decades of service under Horus, had become the ultimate instrument of cosmic strategy, and the galaxy was the battlefield on which he wielded it. The Black Legion expanded as a living organism, recruiting survivors of the heresy, mercenaries, traitor warbands, and even demonic entities that respected Abaddon's dominance over the warp. He led with authority, balancing fear and respect in a way that ensured loyalty without question. Warriors who had once been scattered across the stars now recognized themselves as part of something eternal, something defined by purpose, power, and destiny. Each victory reinforced their cohesion, their belief in their leader, and their willingness to march into annihilation without hesitation. Abaddon himself became a figure of myth. In the depths of space, whispers of his deeds traveled faster than fleets could move. Stories of entire planetary defenses obliterated in hours, fleets annihilated without warning, and legions crushed under tactical brilliance became legend. Even demons spoke of him with deference, recognizing that his control over the warp and the Black Legion was absolute. The name Abaddon the Despoiler was no longer a mere threat. It was an inevitability. Yet the Despoiler was not merely a conqueror. He was a tactician, philosopher of war, and master of the shadowed mind. Every campaign carried a lesson, not only to the Imperium but to himself. Each defeat of loyalist forces, each shattered fortress, each ruined world reinforced his understanding of strategy, human weakness, and the intricate weave of fear and loyalty. Abaddon's campaigns were a curriculum in domination, a testament to the perfect marriage of power, cunning, and resolve. The Black Crusades also became a personal reckoning. Abaddon carried the weight of Horus's legacy with every step, every victory, and every act of terror. The galaxy had not yet paid the full price for Horus's death, and Abaddon was determined to ensure that the Imperium would never recover fully. Every Black Crusade was both tribute and vengeance, a manifestation of the promise made in the aftermath of the Warmaster's fall. By the time the second and third Black Crusades were underway, Abaddon had cemented his role not only as a military commander, but as a symbol. The Imperium feared him. The galaxy whispered his name in terror. And yet, beyond the legend, the myth, and the shadow, Abaddon remained fully aware of his purpose. He did not merely fight for revenge. He fought to reshape the galaxy, to enforce the vision of the Warmaster, and to demonstrate that the Black Legion, under his hand, would endure far longer than any empire, any primarch, or any god dared imagine. In the end, the Black Crusades were not just wars, they were proof of the Despoiler's inevitability. Every campaign strengthened his forces, sharpened his strategies, and deepened the fear that the Imperium would never forget. And Abaddon, standing upon the bridge of his flagship, staring into the void of endless stars, understood with absolute clarity that his crusade was eternal, his vengeance inexhaustible, and his shadow unending. The galaxy had learned fear. Abaddon had ensured it, and the Black Crusades would continue, as relentless and inevitable as the darkness itself.